Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast, a production of neonewstoday.com. I'm your host, Dylan Grabowski. In this episode of the Smart Economy Podcast, we were joined by Rowland Graus, the Director of Product at Agoric. In this episode, we spoke about building a chain and smart contract platform specifically for JavaScript developers, how Agoric's orchestration focuses on cross-chain interoperability, both within the Cosmos Interchain and outside of it, lessons learned in attracting new builders, how Metamask leveraged Agoric's Hardened JS toolkit to build snaps, and so much more. Just a reminder, nothing said in this podcast is a solicitation to buy or sell any tokens, and that nothing should be taken as financial advice. The host or guests may hold tokens discussed in this or any given episode, and you can check out the disclaimer on the Neo News Today webpage for more information. I really enjoyed this conversation with Roland, and I hope you enjoy it too. Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast. Today we're joined by Rowland Graus, the Director of Product at Agoric, a smart contract platform that is really making it easier for users to use blockchain networks. How's it going, Roland?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, super excited to have you. This is one of the first kind of projects that I saw. One of your folks, I saw Dean, the CEO, speaking on stage at Adam Denver. We were just talking about this. And after I saw him speak, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to speak with this project. So I'm really excited to be able to chat with you today and to kind of give listeners a kind of holistic 10,000 foot approach or understanding of what Agoric is. Let's just kind of jump in with a lead question. And I want to ask about chain abstraction, which is something that Dean really hammered home on. So what is chain abstraction? How does it unite fragmented liquidity? How does it create a clear entry point into the ecosystem? And how does it ultimately make the end user's experience frictionless?
Yeah. And so I'll start with what is it? And it really, at a high level, chain abstraction is how we get from the current world of crypto, which is sort of limited in its users, limited in its use cases, to really the mainstream, right? It is how you start to have applications that appeal to mainstream users because they don't have to know what's happening underneath. And, you know, if you're a crypto user these days and you're trying to move cross-chain, there's lots of bridging front ends. There's lots of manual steps you have to do to move your assets around and to change positions as you need. I'm a user too. I deal with this myself. And it's the sort of thing that requires a ton of implicit knowledge about how the underlying systems work, what risks you're taking, all that stuff. And it just, frankly, it's a barrier that the mainstream is never going to cross. And so chain abstraction is how we get to a place where developers can build applications that allow users to not have to care, right? You know, you're always going to have to make different risk assumptions, depending on what chain you're using or what assets you're holding. But there's a limit to how much you can ask users to learn on their own. And what they're going to want in the aggregate is developers or intermediaries to sort of make some of those choices for them. And so they end up trusting those developers and those applications to do those kinds of actions. So the goal then is to unite fragmented liquidity, right? So right now, if you've got a lending protocol on Solana and you want to use Ethereum assets there, that's actually a pretty difficult process to, you know, if you can do it at all, you're probably bridging ETH over Wormhole, and then you've got Wormhole ETH, and how do you transfer that to the asset that you actually want? The goal here is to be able to build applications that do that for the user, unite fragmented liquidity, allow new developers coming into the space to say, okay, I'm going to deploy an application, in this case on Agoric, and I'm going to be able to reach liquidity on Ethereum, liquidity on Solana, liquidity across the Cosmos ecosystem just as easily as I would if I were deployed natively on that chain. And there may be some delays in the transfer and things like that, but it's the sort of choices that we give developers in order to build those more interesting and solid applications.
Right. Yeah. Because if I am an art enjoyer and I'm brought into the blockchain crypto space because of NFTs, I don't really care if I'm buying it on Ethereum. Well, I probably do because I'm spending $80 in transaction fees to do that. Sure. But I don't care if I'm buying it on Stargaze or some NFT platform on Solana or anything like that. So I guess the real question then is how difficult is it as these new chains become more of a staying force in the broader blockchain space? For example, a year ago, Solana would have been written off as dead, and maybe your Agoric devs maybe not dropped the ball, but stopped focusing so much on providing interoperability with that chain. So how does the growth in blockchain networks, I mean, we saw like Sui, Flow, all these new networks launch. How do you guys kind of keep your finger on the pulse when you have this asset, but then you have these growing chains and growing ecosystems?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And actually, I might start with the first thing you said, which I think some of your listeners might think isn't true now, which is that you don't care what chain the NFT is on. I actually think right now most users do care, but the case that we want to make and what I believe is that cannot and will not be true in 5 years, right? Right now, the primary NFT buyers are people that are locked into a given ecosystem. And like, most of us here probably listening have come down the crypto rabbit hole a certain way. Like I bought Ethereum in 2016, 2017 and became aware of everything that was deployed on Ethereum. And because I held that asset, I was very interested in those things, right? And so I might have been more likely to buy an NFT on ETH. That's not going to be, as we see these protocols and applications deployed to the mainstream, that's not going to be how most people onboard into crypto anymore. It's going to be through like Starbucks or something like that, right? And again, bad example, they recently had a failed project there, but like, I truly think that is where this has to go. And so in those cases with those kinds of users, they won't care. And what they're going to care about is, okay, I have this asset. How can I easily access it? How can I do the sorts of native crypto things that I need to do to hold it and move it around? And then if I want to sell it, how do I sell it? And they may not even care if that sale is happening on a particular marketplace. That might get aggregated for them as well. And so that's sort of the direction that this needs to go in. And so I think the important question there is, the point there is that it's hard, right? It is hard to keep a finger on the pulse of everything that's happening in crypto. And, I think a lot of people that have been in the space since like 2019 or earlier used to be able to know everything that was happening. If there was a new deployment, you kind of knew, right? You knew a new L1 was launching. You knew about its consensus mechanism. You were able to kind of keep all that in your head. That's just not true anymore. I'm in the space full time and it's my job to keep up to date with things, and it's still hard. And, the question is not how will developers do it? The question is, how would we expect users to do it? And how would we expect sort of mainstream people coming in that don't have any experience doing this to be able to sort of make what is effectively a venture bet on an ecosystem and be locked in there, right? And so I think the goal here is to say, as specialists in this space, and it likely isn't the Agoric platform itself. The Agoric platform would enable connections anywhere, but it would be the builders on top of the Agoric platform that are specialists in the space that they are trying to build for. They are the ones that can keep their finger on the pulse of things. And from this perspective, as an example there, like I was in arguments with people about Solana not being dead a year ago, right? And it's because if you're focused on that kind of thing, you can track like, oh, I actually see a ton of activity here, and the narrative that seems to be pervasive in the market is just not accurate. And so as we think about building this out from the Agoric side, it really is, how do we prioritize the connections that matter, and then get to the long tail of connections over time? And some of them we get for free, right? As a chain that's natively connected to IBC, it's very easy to connect to every Cosmos chain. As IBC expands to Ethereum, via composable finance or via Union, then we can use that. There's also efforts to expand it to Solana. There are several other transport layers that will move. And so we're targeting the most bang for the buck as we build out our connections. But that process actually should be rather straightforward, and then it's a matter of maintaining it from the platform side.
Awesome. I can't wait to delve more into chain abstraction and interoperability. But I do want to kind of take a step back, and you gave a little hint at this in your answer. I just kind of want to hear a little bit about your blockchain and crypto genesis. Is it 2016, 2017 that you bought your first ETH and started paying attention? Or did you hear about the Bitcoin white paper in 2011 and then ignore everything for another 5 years?
Yeah. So I was in college, and, let's just say I was in college before Bitcoin was launched, if that dates me a little bit. I played a lot of online poker, and a bunch of the guys I lived with ended up playing online poker professionally. They were far better than me, to be very clear. But because I lived with them, I was doing it on much, much lower stakes. And so I was sort of like prime position to hear about Bitcoin as it was launched, because poker had it Black Friday, and I had folks move from where they were living in Virginia to Australia so they could keep playing, that sort of thing. And I was aware of Bitcoin and just did nothing about it. And then I was at MIT Sloan in 2013. And, a few prominent current crypto folks were part of the class there. Melton Demir sent me an email with like, here's all this stuff you should read on Bitcoin and sidechains. Never opened that email. So I had a bunch of fumbles here. And then as Ethereum was launching, my tech lead at the time, I was working at a startup and I was product manager, and it was me and a tech lead trying to build out a new product, and it was, B2B SaaS kind of stuff. But he'd been in Bitcoin for a while, and he was just a huge ETH head. And so we went out for drinks and he told me all about Ethereum, and I was like, okay, I'm interested in this as an investment asset. And so I decided to buy it, but I'd had too many drinks and like couldn't figure out Coinbase when I got home, and thought, well, I'll just do it tomorrow. Didn't do that. And so then 5 months later, I ended up finally buying Ethereum like 5x higher. And then, I think a lot of people sort of go through the same pathway. Is like, you buy something and then you do the research to figure out what it was you bought, and then you go down the rabbit hole. And so that's what happened to me also. As a product manager, what I could see during the ICO boom, which is around the time I was getting in, was, it was super fun to kind of play with it, but I didn't see anything I could contribute to professionally yet. I wasn't a cryptographer. I wasn't an engineer with the kind of experience that could build these things. I didn't want to sell something that seemed like vaporware. And so I mostly held off until late 2019 or early 2020 when I saw applications that let you connect with MetaMask. And I was like, oh, that is something that as a product person, I understand. I know how I would build these things. And this is something that's like 10x better than I see in my financial life. At the same time, I'm like out trying to buy a condo in Somerville, Mass. And it's like, I'm dealing with wiring money, and like, I got married and had a bunch of problems like depositing checks that we had gotten because they had both of our names on them. Like that sort of thing, just like the dichotomy between that and what I was doing in crypto was just so wild that it was like, this is what I have to do professionally forever. And so that was around 2020. I ended up finding Agoric, and that, I've stayed ever since.
Yeah, that's incredible. So I got into the space in the 2017 ICO boom era as well. But I came in as a content creator. So I was writing about projects that were building on this L1 that was an ecosystem that I worked within, the Neo ecosystem. You might remember from back in those days.
Chinese Ethereum, I remember.
Yeah, the Ethereum killer. Neo's still here. But that being said, I did cover about 30 projects that ICO'd, and I covered all of their obituaries afterwards, because the 2017 to 2020 era, there really was nothing going on with blockchain. You could sell a white paper, you could sell some tokens, but where was the ability for me to verify my identity on chain, or to do any sort of simple thing like a token swap? That didn't come around until the time that you kind of entered the space. Right. So I think something that also lends to the value that you bring to Agoric and to the broader blockchain and crypto space in general is your resume is pretty extensive. I studied interdisciplinary social sciences in undergrad because I couldn't pick one thing to focus on. So I had to focus on one thing that focused on 10 things. So in your background, you've had a variety of different positions: data analyst, co-founder, product manager, venture fellow, DevRel, in a variety of different verticals: private equity, military, supply chain, medical, venture capital, cloud systems. So can you share a little bit about your professional arc? And maybe because you kind of did explore so many different verticals and types of positions, maybe you can link all them together to what was the driving force that united all of those positions and why you wanted to work in those spaces. What was the thing that connected you to each job you had?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So I was an econ degree undergrad, and I took economics as sort of a fifth class my freshman year, and I just loved it. And I realized that I was better at it than other people. It was just like I got things faster than my friends were, and it's like that was a sign like, okay, maybe this is something that I would do well at. And I ended up going into consulting for private equity after undergrad, in large part because I just liked learning things. It was a way to just not have to pick a career necessarily, and I could just speed run through industries. I probably did 200 projects across like 40 industries in 3 or 4 years. And I saw a whole lot doing that, but it was, I loved it, but it burned me out. And so I actually didn't, at that time, I didn't know what I wanted. I had never really had to pick anything, so, similar to you. And I actually think crypto, especially early on, attracts a lot of cross-disciplinary folks, right? It sort of merges computer science and economics and governance and, social sciences and community. Like there's a lot of stuff that happens all at the same time, and you kind of have to be able to move between those levels. And I enjoyed that in my consulting career, but I knew that there's something very unfulfilling about having the product of your work be a deck that you send to somebody that can just like ignore it if they want to, right? Like I know that I spent weekends working on something that went into somebody's email trash like immediately. And so I really wanted to actually start my own company, but I kind of fortunately had the wherewithal to know that I like wasn't, I was too young and I didn't know what I was doing. And so I went to MIT Sloan for business school, not because I needed a business school education necessarily, like my econ degree and my consulting experience basically was that. But what it let me do was spend 2 years working on ideas and figuring out how to actually build something for real, how to talk to venture capitalists or the kinds of people I would need to talk to actually be able to succeed in that world, on how to hire people, all the stuff that I just didn't have any experience doing. And to meet other like-minded people, which I think uniquely kind of exists in the MIT community. And then coming out of that, I still didn't quite feel ready to start my own thing. I was working on a startup for the whole last semester there, and it was too far from revenue, too far from funding. And so I ended up joining as a product manager to someone else's startup. And I realized that product was a way that I could scratch a lot of the itches that I had for building something real, without necessarily having to start my own company, and allowed me to kind of learn more of the skills that I would need to learn to start my own company eventually. And so I just kind of liked product and I kept doing it. And that was sort of the through line since business school. So since 2015, I've been doing usually a PM working on a new product at a startup that I've been at. And that was obviously true at Agoric, but the difference with Agoric is that, instead of one product that we're launching a chain and a smart contract platform. And we're doing most of the design and development of the Intra protocol, which is a stablecoin launched on top. And, so we probably were launching 7 or 8 products, depending on how you counted. And that is still ongoing, right? We're still developing and reaching product market fit with our platform. And that's very exciting. So that's kind of the through line is I like being on the edge and building new things and working with the ambiguity that comes with that.
Cool. Yeah. It sounds like when you started your career, you were focusing on one product at a time. And as we'll get into in this conversation, you're now focusing on 8 or more. And I can't wait to hear how you juggle managing all of those. But I did want to just really briefly touch upon this. You've kind of like left a little bit of a breadcrumb trail that you live in the Northeast. And in your Twitter profile, you have the shield, the Stand with Crypto shield. I got to fly out to DC in December with Coinbase to talk with Colorado legislators because I'm based out of Colorado. So I'm just curious, given your proximity to DC because you're in the Northeast and your badge, do you have any sort of affinity or affiliation with Stand with Crypto? Are you just a supporter of good crypto legislation in the US?
So I would say it's mostly the latter. I'm a supporter of good crypto legislation in the US. I think that the work there is probably very hard and very important and probably underappreciated in the space. I grew up in the DC area, and so I don't necessarily go back except to visit family, but that's something that I could see myself contributing more to once I get out of this phase of my career where I'm just heads down all the time. So
yeah. I'm actually really curious because dating back to the infrastructure bill in 2021, that was the first time in the US that I felt working in the blockchain space that maybe my career is a little rocky. And if I want to keep working here, there's a world in 5+ years where I might have to move abroad in order to do so. Similar to how your friends in college had to move to Australia after the online poker Black Friday deal. Do you feel any of that pressure with the current wording and some of the negative legislation that's being proposed? Are you concerned about your future of building in blockchain here in the US, or is that just kind of noise?
It's not noise. It definitely, I'm guessing most folks that are working at projects like me that are US based feel this too. It certainly, I have days where it actually drags on me quite a bit, right? It can be very disheartening to sort of watch the government that you probably mostly voted for, like seemingly target your industry, right? And seemingly sort of suggest that you're doing something nefarious or criminal when, what I think I'm doing is actually like highly aligned with American values and all that stuff, right? And so that definitely does drag on me. I really do. I respect a lot of the work that most of the core lobbyists from the crypto industry do, and the kinds of things that they put out on Twitter to sort of explain what's going on. My sense of this over time is that largely there's been a lot of pretty negative stuff proposed that mostly has not made it. And I think that there are some champions in both parties. And so again, I can't spend too much time thinking about it, because thinking about it is, it's a huge distraction. So far, it feels like we've avoided the worst. I'm certainly not taking that for granted, though. I think you kind of mentioned my friend moving abroad. Like, that was easy at 22. I'm a little older now. I've got a family. And so, I do live 90 minutes from the Canadian border, but I think we're probably not moving anytime soon. So
cool. Yeah, I appreciate that. Just trying to raise awareness in any way possible, because 52 million Americans do hold crypto, and there's this asset that everybody holds, but sometimes it feels like we're an enemy of the state. But we don't have to really belabor that point. To kind of bring us back to the conversation, I'll lob you a softball
Sure.
that I'm almost positive you're going to have a great answer for. Do you or does Agoric have a multi-chain thesis for the future? And is there a world where there are multiple different blockchains, blockchain L1s, blockchain L2s, that we have to kind of be able to interoperate between?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, that's core to Agoric's thesis. And it also aligns with why Agoric chose the Cosmos ecosystem when it did, which was before I joined, but it was sort of the alignment of those values, right? That blockchains, there is, back in 2020, I think most people in the industry seemed to believe that there would just be one blockchain, and it was a winner take all. It would be Ethereum, or it would be somebody else. And that's where all value and all activity would occur. And that just, fortunately, that mindset has kind of left the market for the most part. And I think it's probably accepted wisdom at this point that there will be a large number of blockchains. How many is unclear. But there are trade-offs at all levels of blockchain design. And so it doesn't make sense for one chain to do literally everything. And so that's the world that Agoric is building towards. And so when we talk about, you asked earlier about chain abstraction and what that was, Agoric's contribution there is what we are calling orchestration. And our view is that is how developers will build for chain abstraction. Chain abstraction is a goal. It is something that we want to give to users as an experience. But the question is, how do you do that? And as a developer, the way you do that is you build on a chain, you bring your business logic to a chain that allows you to natively reach across chain and execute actions that take multiple blocks very seamlessly. And I can go into more detail there about sort of how that works and why that's important. But that is where Agoric is leaning into, and it's been part of our tech stack forever. The whole design of the Agoric virtual machine and all the work that we've done has always had this within it. But what we realized recently is that it is actually critical for multi-chain development, and something that is hard to replicate elsewhere, or in certain cases impossible. And so that is the world that we're building towards. We see the explosion of L2s, chainlets, app chains. That's going to keep happening. Many chains will grow and die. But as a developer, you're going to need to be able to access them. And so that's what we're building for.
Yeah. And before we delve into orchestration, which I definitely want to cover, I do just kind of want to ask, why JavaScript? Why is Agoric doubling down on JavaScript? Is this... I think there's something like 210 million developers across the world, and there's only a handful of programming languages that have resounding popularity. Is JavaScript just simply one of these languages that captures all of these traditional devs? Or is it just like the toolkit and the programming language that the founders were most comfortable with?
And so you'd have to ask them which came first. What I know is there's sort of two things that are important there. One, JavaScript is the most used programming language by far in the world. And most developers who would say that their primary language is something else also know JavaScript because they mostly have had to, right? They've had to do a front end at some point, or they've had to learn Node. They've had to deal with JavaScript at some point in their career. And there are a large number of developers for whom JavaScript is the primary language, and it dwarfs the existing crypto ecosystem. So that is sort of like point one for why Agoric chose JavaScript. Point two, and I think the choice of JavaScript preceded this, but many of the core folks at Agoric have been working very hard at the JavaScript standards committee for a long time, in cases decades, to kind of bring the kinds of security capabilities into the JavaScript standard that are needed in order to have a deterministic smart contract language. And so, one of the complaints we often hear from folks that hear where JavaScript is like, well, how could you possibly have a smart contracting language in JavaScript? It's so insecure. That's actually not true. And JavaScript within it has the ability to be deterministic and highly securable. And that's what we've done on our end with Hardened JS in concert with a bunch of other folks. But within it, it has the capability to be this actually great modularized smart contracting language. And so that's what Agoric is working with. And so that's sort of the core of it, right? Our expectation is, and frankly, what we found is that we often spend a lot of time talking about our tech and our differentiators and things like that. And what new developers hear is, oh, this is JavaScript. We should go build there. And so it does become a really important point. If you are working in a place where you're primarily using Node or something like that, and you have an idea for a decentralized application, you could take 6 months off to learn Solidity, or you can just build in the language you're already familiar with and comfortable with and use all your same tools. And that's what we're offering.
Yeah, I'm very much a proponent of go to where the developers are and give them support in the languages they're most familiar with. So this might not be a question you're the best suited to answer because you're so product facing, but do you see that you have folks just landing in Agoric land because they do come from JavaScript and they're just like, this is the most robust ecosystem and robust tooling that's available. So I want to learn blockchain and this is where my SEO search sent me. Do you kind of get a sense of that? Or is it like blockchain natives that are coming around and like, oh, I don't want to use Solidity anymore. I want to use JavaScript. Do you have a sense for what that's like?
Yeah. And so this ends up being an important question as Agoric scales. We absolutely have some of the former where people find us because they are looking for a JavaScript smart contracting, chain and a place where they can deploy. When we talk about orchestration and chain abstraction, the early audience for that is primarily people that already see the problems, and those people are crypto native. And so that story is not necessarily a story for the mainstream yet, although it is important for them. And I think there's a clear way to make that case to a mainstream developer coming in. But our beachhead, so to speak, is going to be crypto developers that see the UX problems with doing multi-chain things, or see an opportunity to stitch together capabilities or assets from two different chains, and realize that the fastest and best place to build that is going to be Agoric. And so that's who we're focused on for now. But I think that will be different in a year as sort of more of the, we've kind of brought in more of those crypto native folks and start turning our attention more to, going to JavaScript conferences, but spending more time in the JavaScript community.
Yeah. I know like Algorand is doubling down on language communities now and not necessarily going to like crypto conferences. So I think this is probably a theme we're going to see emerging over the next year or two. To double down on that, are your developers coming from like interchain land, or are they just like coming from EVM land and they're fed up with what's going on over there and they're ready for change and ready for something new like IBC?
Yeah. What I've seen mostly is that if you've deployed a project somewhere in EVM land, you're kind of unlikely to move away from that. That's not universally true, but I don't expect that we're going to draw a lot of developers that have deployed projects. Where we may draw developers from is there's a whole lot of entrepreneurial developers that go out and try new tech and want to build a crypto application and probably have tried something in EVM already, but aren't already tied to something running in production. And, so for example, the Calypso team that is, they are building out what's going to be sort of one of the first reference applications of orchestration on Agoric right now. They've done all sorts of stuff. But they ended up getting sort of through a bounty that Agoric put out, they got connected here, saw the tech, and was like, oh, this is the place where we can build the thing we wanted to build. And that's what I expect to see is where, there's a lot of developers kind of floating around in the ecosystem that don't have something deployed in production, have ideas, occasionally explore ideas, and are going to find that Agoric is the best place to actually deploy some of the things they want to do. And so that's sort of where we're starting, and where we are focused right now. We may find that as orchestration picks up steam, existing large EVM projects find a use case for it. My expectation though is that it's going to be mostly people with new ideas.
Yeah. So I had Austin Federa from the Solana Foundation on in Q4 last year. And a point that he brought up was that at Breakpoint, which is Solana's main conference every year, that last year in 2023, they were noticing a lot of the developers that were at Breakpoint were folks who had never built on Bitcoin and had never built on Ethereum before, but they were building on Solana for the first time. I only bring that up just to highlight the fact that we're now getting into a place as a blockchain industry where we have multiple ecosystems that people can choose to build in. And now we're getting a new wave of developers who've never even been tarnished by Bitcoin or EVM. Right. And they're open to a whole new world of blockchains and smart contract platforms that are out there. So it seems like Agoric is really primed to be able to capture all these folks. I'm a Cosmos fan, so I'm just going to put on my adversarial hat for a quick second.
That's very Cosmos of you.
I feel like Cosmos had a lot of easy attention on crypto Twitter in 2020, 21, 22, things with airdrops. And it was just so easy to install a Kepler wallet and to interact with your ledger. And it was kind of hyped back then. But after the most recent 2022, 2023 bear market, you look on crypto Twitter and you don't necessarily see so much IBC, Interchain, Cosmos talk. But when you go to Atom Denver 2 and you see this lineup of folks that are there, really solid projects, really smart people, really cool things that are being built there. So maybe it's just a part of the market cycle. I don't know what, but what is it about the Cosmos ecosystem to you that's really exciting and engaging right now that you think is attracting new folks that maybe the traders on crypto Twitter still haven't caught on to yet and started acting as a megaphone for exciting hodlers and normies in Cosmos again? Sure.
So I have a lot of thoughts there. I want to start with, again, sort of something you said earlier on, and that I think is important. So you were talking about developers being able to build in multiple ecosystems. And I think that what has been true for quite a while, but very soon is not going to be true. And again, this speaks to the world that Agoric is building for, is you had a lot of lock-in. Part of the reason that Ethereum is the default choice for people to build, or Polygon might be the default choice, is that it's actually it has been hard to what you care about when you're building, especially a project that needs assets onboarded, like a DeFi project or something like that, is you care about the liquidity that you can reach. What users can you easily onboard that will bring their money to your project? And that has been, you've basically been choosing chains by that metric. And so when you see Solana starting to get a better ecosystem, in large part, it was because the asset values had increased, and suddenly now you've got more assets that are available to new projects. And so as a developer, it's okay, well, now I can build here because it's easy to onboard those users. And I never actually wanted to build on ETH. It just it was the only choice for me. The world that Agoric is building for is the world in which bridging those assets and orchestrating those assets across those multiple chains is actually easy. And so all of a sudden, you can build an Agoric application that reaches assets on Ethereum, reaches assets on Solana. And so that I think ends up being an important trajectory for where developers go and how they choose where to build. It's, up until now, it really has been less of a tech choice and more of an asset choice. As we start looking at why did Cosmos fail to get the kind of attention that it could have gotten? I think there's a lot of contingent history in that. And again, I've been working in Cosmos, and so this has been very on my mind. A lot of I'm aware of pretty much everything that's happening in Cosmos. I may hold assets of various Cosmos projects. I'm very, tuned into the Cosmos attention level. In the 2021 cycle, Cosmos was basically getting a bid after November. It was after the peak. Atom and Osmosis hit their peaks, and they then that got cut off by the whole cycle ending, right? It was fine. It was sort of like the belief there was like, oh my God, finally we are seeing retail attention on the Cosmos ecosystem. And then it just got shut down. And that, yeah, well, so this is pre-Luna. This is like the Fed starting to raise rates. It's like, oh, the whole market is now going to tank. And then Luna tanked. And I think that it's hard to overestimate how traumatic that was for the Cosmos ecosystem. Like at the time, we've been building and interprotocol is deployed on Agoric. It's an over-collateralized stablecoin. I still have to tell people that it isn't Luna. Like when this is a MakerDAO style model, it liquidates, it's like completely different than Luna, but I still have to go explain that because people are terrified of an algorithmic stablecoin. And that lasted for quite a while. And I think Zucky, prominent Cosmos developer, advisor to tons of projects, including Agoric, he sort of famously tweeted out that Cosmos had about a year to figure its shit out, or we were toast. This was like 3/4 of a year ago, something like that. And then what happened is DYDX moved to a Cosmos chain. And so, you kind of mentioned it lacking attention. I'm going to sort of push back on that. Like Celestia is a Cosmos chain. DYDX is a Cosmos chain. Saga just launched at 5 billion fully diluted. Dimension is at 5 or 6 fully diluted. Like, I actually think the opposite is happening, where there is quite a bit of attention, but it's just not necessarily directed at traditional Cosmos chains. It's seeing the new activity, which is then going to link into, absolutely osmosis is going to benefit from that, right? Like the largest Cosmos DEX is going to benefit from lots of large Cosmos assets coming in. IBC getting connected to Ethereum, IBC getting connected to Solana if it does, Hyperlane coming in and making those connections easier. Late in 2021 through like 2022, it was pretty hard to get assets into Cosmos. You had to bridge over Axelar, and then you had liquidity challenges, or you had to literally go through Atom to a centralized exchange. Now, Circle CCDP, you can do a USDC bridge for $1 from Solana, regardless of how many assets you're bridging, and that completes in like 2 minutes. Those sorts of things are going to make it very easy to onboard into Cosmos, and we're going to start to see a lot of the kinds of Cosmos applications that have always been good, but haven't necessarily had the assets to work with to make them take off, actually take off. So, I'm actually quite bullish and quite excited. And there will be some Cosmos chains fail. Like that's the whole point of Cosmos, is that can happen and it isn't traumatic for the whole ecosystem.
Yeah. Oh man, that was a great response. Thank you for pushing back. I do agree. Like you do see DYDX and that like made major splashes, and to see it become an app chain as opposed to an L2 or migrate to an L2 or anything like that. You do kind of see this traction picking back up for Cosmos. And like, if this was a different podcast, I would love to dig into the Cosmos Hub and how maybe Atom can benefit from this and what are the pros and cons of that. But let's try and keep it focused on Agoric and maybe just like the general ecosystem and broadly how it can attract folks into Cosmos and therefore Agoric. You did mention USDC landing on one of the app chains. And I'm just curious because I'm not sure if IST was incubated in-house or if it was a team that started building on Agoric and you guys just kind of gave them support. But how does having is it algorithmically backed or is it over collateralized, the IST token?
It's over collateralized. And so it has a model that's similar to MakerDAO currently, in the sense that it's I think there's 5 assets it currently accepts that you can mint against, which are Atom, ST Atom, Persistences, STK Atom, ST Tia, and ST Osmo. And so those are the vault assets that they're over collateralized, so you can mint against them. But it also, like Maker, has a parity stability module, which allows you to mint IST against certain approved other stablecoins with individual mint limits. And so you can use native USDC and Axelar USDC and Gravity USDC to mint IST up to a certain approved risk limit by an external committee that was elected to manage the economics of the protocol. So I think your implicit question was sort of, how does that work together with IST? Is USDC, is it a competitor? Is it, yeah. I think it's both, right? Like we're friendly with the Noble team that is the app chain that brought native USDC to Cosmos. Native USDC is really important for the Cosmos ecosystem. At the same time, IST has certain characteristics that might make it more attractive in certain circumstances, right? And I don't think that I don't think stablecoins are winner take all. I think it's sort of like winner take most, and there likely will be a few successful stablecoins. USDC has certain properties. It's centralized. It's controlled by Circle. Some people may or may not like that. And it has certain capabilities that Circle will allow. And so this gets into a little bit of orchestration here, but Circle has a protocol called CCTP, which lets you basically say, I have native USDC on Solana or Ethereum or, several other chains, and I want it on Noble in the Cosmos ecosystem. And so I make a transaction on the Ethereum blockchain, which burned my USDC there, and then Circle will mint USDC on the chain that I wanted, which is a very useful kind of bridging activity. And since you're trusting Circle with your USDC anyway, it's sort of, you're not really adding a whole lot of trust assumptions. Although there's smart contract risk. But what Circle won't do is it won't say, okay, I'm going to mint it, and then I want you to send it to Osmosis and make a trade. You can't do that right now. And so, when we talk to a lot of the folks that are, and most of this is happening within Cosmos, when you talk to the folks that are trying to push the multi-chain ecosystem forward, and so like Skip Protocol is a good example there, they are blocked with some of the things that they can do because those capabilities don't exist. But what's really easy on Agoric is you can launch a contract that says, spin up an address on the Agoric chain. And when that address receives assets, do X, where X is something arbitrary. And X could be, go swap on Osmosis and then take my position and lend it out on Umi and borrow something against that and then send it to another chain. Like all of those things could happen without signing an additional transaction on the Agoric chain. And so now all of a sudden, we add all these capabilities that wouldn't exist otherwise. Interprotocol and IST can take advantage of those natively. So Interprotocol can natively mint IST to whatever chain you want to go to. It can, as we start to link it with orchestration, what I'm really excited about is being able to say, okay, I've got this exotic position somewhere else in Cosmos. Like you could think of it as an Osmosis LP position or a DYDX perp or something along those lines. I'm actually going to mint IST against that. And that could be risk controlled by the same economic committee. And so the protocol could reach across chain and say, all right, you're going to lock this LP position on the Osmosis chain. You don't need to move it to Agoric. And I'm going to see that happened and mint IST directly to your chain. And so as a user, you're effectively not even leaving your chain, like the chain that you're operating on or the app that you're operating on. Those are the sorts of things that Interprotocol can do that will be just difficult or kind of not in Circle's best interest, right? And so I think that's how these different stable coins will coexist. IST will also be demanded by folks that want a little bit of a different risk profile versus entirely being backed by Circle. That will continue to exist in this space, and I'm one of those people.
Yeah, and I do want to kind of give for folks who are a little bit skeptical of algorithmic or over collateralized stablecoins, I do kind of want to give a shout out to IST that the majority of the basket of assets that back it are also yield generating assets like Atom, staked Atom. You earn these assets for staking them and securing the network that they're built to secure. So there is some kind of like baked in economic models that can ensure that there is a little bit more stability or liquidity available to play the games that are necessary to keep IST pegged at $1.
Mm-hmm.
You, many times throughout this conversation, we've brought up orchestration, and I kind of view it as the way that Agoric uses its tools to be able to seamlessly connect other chains from within the interchain. Maybe you've already done this, but just for the benefit of the listeners, can you just explain, like I'm 5, what Agoric's vision of orchestration is?
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe you can also talk about how Agoric's smart contracts enable multi-chain DApp communication, leveraging orchestration.
Yeah. And so the orchestration story, and so I'll do the first one, explain like I'm 5, and then I'll do the other one with a little more technical detail. The orchestration story is fundamentally a story for developers, right? It is a story for how do you build chain abstracted applications. And so what we are launching there is a set of orchestration APIs, which allow you to basically say, okay, I want to interact with the Osmosis chain. I'm going to get myself an object called Osmosis, and I'm going to do, and I'm highly simplifying here, I'm going to do osmosis.create account. And that will, underneath the hood, do a bunch of complicated IBC stuff to spin up an interchain account on the Osmosis chain. But then as a developer, you don't have to deal with any of that. You're just sort of working with a set of very clear APIs for how to manage those activities cross-chain. So that's piece one. The other piece gets more into the technical details of how Agoric operates, but you can think of it as a transaction on the Agoric chain may trigger lots of other transactions between contracts or across chains and wait for notifications that it completed, right? That only requires one user transaction, but the contract itself can keep operating for an arbitrary amount of time. So for example, you could sign a transaction on the Agoric chain using orchestration that says, when my unbond my Osmo, and when it unbonds, sell it for USDC, and then send my USDC to Noble. And it will wait. You'll sign that transaction. It'll create the unbond. And then in 21 days, when that Osmo unbonds, it will continue. You don't need to set something on your calendar. You don't need to do anything. The contract can do that for you. And that's the sort of thing that is missing right now, or sort of not easy to build anywhere else in the blockchain space. Most of these other protocols will kind of use like external oracles or keeper networks to be like, okay, I set up a notification, then I'll tickle the contract for it to keep going. That's super complicated to set up and manage. This is just, when it finishes unbonding, go to the next line on the contract. And so that is the sort of thing that will enable a whole bunch of capability that just isn't possible right now. And so I think I've blended those answers. I'm not sure that I achieved explain it like I'm five, but hopefully, that's clear for both the developer audience and anyone listening that's not a developer. What we're really doing is enabling the kinds of actions cross-chain that just can't happen right now. And the reason the cross-chain UX is so bad and so manual and difficult is not because developers are stupid. It's because they don't have the tools to build this stuff yet. And Agoric will have those tools for them when we launch orchestration.
So in this example, you were using, let's say I have an asset on a certain app chain and I want to unbond it and convert it to Circle. For most of the app chains that I'm familiar with, the unbonding period is 21 days. So as kind of the interchain grows and new standards are implemented into these new app chains, what does the complexity for Agoric's orchestration look like when maybe a new app chain wants its unbonding period to be 14 days or 28 days, and you start throwing in these little changes? Mm-hmm. How does that throw Agoric for a loop? Does it impact what you guys are able to do? Is it modular in a way that you can just update a line and that will be able to address those changes? How do you kind of plan for the future of different kind of parameters that new chains will operate within? Yeah.
And so for your specific question, the answer is basically, you can query the parameters of the chain. You can get the unbonded period, right? The more general question is, how does Agoric stay up to date with the wide range of chains that launch? Some of those will require more specific effort to build in capabilities for, whereas others will kind of all operate within the same scope. So a new Cosmos SDK chain that launches probably is going to have most things operating similarly to the existing ones, and the queries will look the same. Our belief is the number of different types of chains that launch and different types of things that are different enough that require unique effort is going to be relatively small. And so the APIs can get updated to use them. We'll also have, the way we're thinking about this, at least right now, is sort of two level. One, we'll have some certain well-known chains with clear objects that you can just request by name. And then we'll also have the generic ability to specify a chain yourself, right? And so you can request an object that has the characteristics that you put in. And then as the developer, Agoric hasn't necessarily launched an upgrade to the API yet to cover this new chain that just launched yesterday or something like that. But you can just put the details in yourself on that object and then do the requests as you need. It's a little more manual, but you'll still get all the benefits of orchestration through that and the ability to link actions together and to compose cross-chain together.
Maybe this is a spicy question. I don't know. Where on the timeline is Agoric's kind of vision for providing this for outside the IBC interchain land? What about Solana and Ethereum and other L1s that might pop up between now and 5 years from now?
Q2. So our initial orchestration MVP launch is focused within the Cosmos ecosystem just because it's the lowest hanging fruit. But I mentioned the Calypso project that's launching on top. They are working with EVM projects over Axelar already. And so that won't be covered in the APIs, but just like I just said around, you can sort of specify a chain as you need. They're working with a little bit lower level structures to just be able to do that. We expect to wrap that in the APIs within Q2. We're in Q2 now. And we're actively looking at the best way to connect to Solana. So there are a few options right now, and we're investigating all of those. We sort of have a matrix of how do we get to chain X and what capabilities can we get from that chain, which goes down to like, can we, base case, can we send tokens, but can we then do general message passing? Can we get notifications back that things have happened? So there's sort of like a whole engineering deep dive that we have to do for each chain, but there's only, as you kind of mentioned, there's a few relevant ecosystems, and that's where we're starting.
Yeah. And so I guess it's just where the users, and I don't like to use this word because it denotes that you guys are just chasing, where the money is, but basically wherever the noise is. Like right now, it's really noisy in Solana. There's a lot of meme coins there. There's a lot of people trying it out. Maybe like my mom who never even bought Bitcoin, maybe she buys Solana. Like that's the point where we're at in the cycle. So how do you guys just, how does a new ecosystem pop up on your radar and kind of like perk your ears and be like, oh, maybe we should start looking into that?
Yeah. And so I think my answer to that will evolve. Frankly, we haven't had to address that yet, right? From my side, we're starting with the Cosmos ecosystem. There's a lot of, from my perspective, there's a lot of pretty obvious use cases that you could build just with that, right? You could have a yield aggregator for deposit USDC or IST and get me the best yield across multiple lending platforms. So we'll start there. It's obvious we need to connect to the EVM ecosystems, so both Ethereum and the primary ETH2s. It's obvious we need to connect to Solana. And so those are the directions we're going. Beyond that, we'll sort of have to see, and it may be driven by demand from developers. I am of the belief that the core driver for developers is being able to access assets and capabilities in different places. And so we may be unaware of something that's happening on Polkadot or on an Avalanche subnet or something like that. And we may get a request for that. That's somewhere between we basically get it for free and it's like 3 days of work to launch it versus it might be multiple months of effort. And so we'll sort of have to play it by ear as we go there. But I think the amount of capability we get just from the Cosmos, Ethereum, and Solana ecosystems is giant.
Yeah, cool. I want to take a moment to shill Agoric's hardened JavaScript architecture. Super cool. Last year, Metamask launched Snaps, which allows third parties to integrate features into the wallet that can impact interoperability, transaction insights, and notifications. So I kind of want to just like let you go wild and shill hardened JavaScript's architecture right now. Maybe in order to do so, I could set you up. Could you share what snaps are and how MetaMask was able to build snaps modeled directly off of this hardened JavaScript?
Yeah. And so Snap, we've had a long partnership with MetaMask in developing this, and they've been a great partner in not only sort of working with the hardened JavaScript team and folks at Agoric, but also doing red teaming of it, testing things out. There was a great session back in 2021. We were sort of going through that. MetaMask has been their core challenge is they are a browser extension on the user system, and they want to be permissionless in that they want new chains to be able to add themselves to MetaMask and let you sign. But how do they do that without risking the user's other assets? And that is ultimately what Snaps is solving for them, which is you've got this modular and contained thing that can get added to MetaMask that doesn't risk anything else. And hardened JavaScript, and I'm probably not the best one to speak to exactly how they do it or specifically where they brought hardened JS in, but at a high level, what it allowed them to do was model the risk of the system and be clear through object capabilities, be clear about which parts of the system get access to what. And so they can launch snaps in a modular sort of plugin type ecosystem for MetaMask in a way that would have been very difficult without this. And so they have a big project called Lava Moat, which is really just like a map of all of the capabilities and authority that's given to anything within the MetaMask system. And they're able to do that by using hardened JavaScript.
Awesome. We're running out of time, so we'll zoom out. I do just want to let you know, and folks listening to this, that I wanted to talk about not just the IST, but also the BLD token and the dual token architecture, also Zoe framework and the really cool escrow services that are built into that. There are so many other cool parts about the Agoric tech stack that I would have loved to have dug into. Maybe if this was a longer form pod, then we could have. So folks who are listening to this, please go check out the architecture and look into those things. They're really cool. But I want to zoom out and kind of wrap up talking about building the ecosystem out. And one of the best ways that I've found to build out an ecosystem is to attract and lure builders and entrepreneurs. Something that has always done a pretty good job at that, in my opinion, is giving away money for people's work. So can you share a little bit about the Agoric Bounty program and maybe the success that you've seen with a project or two that have come out of that?
Yeah. And I wish we were having this conversation in 2 weeks because I think there may be some announcements. But we were running a bounty program for several years, and we did that in two ways. One, I would spec out things that I thought would be interesting to launch on the Agoric chain, which would be sort of small contracts that could be modular functionality that other people could use. Or we did what we were calling reverse bounties, where we would talk with builders that would come into our social spaces that wanted to do something. And a lot of those ideas were things that we didn't think of ourselves, but were highly relevant. And so we would then work with them to turn that into a bounty that we would pay. And our basic view is that bounties tend to be the most effective way to onboard builders into the ecosystem. That has been where we've really seen success, because what it does is it gives people a reason to actually dive in and start to build something. And some percentage of people will see the platform and see how it's built and say, okay, this isn't for me for whatever reason. Some percentage of people will look at it and say, oh my God, I can't imagine building a decentralized application anywhere else. And they will just fall down the Agoric rabbit hole and go into Zoe and all the things that we haven't really gotten to. And so bounties are a really great way to do that. That program is going to get restarted, focused on orchestration sometime in Q2 likely. And we also expect to have a grants program with a similar focus, which is probably more extensive than bounties. And so, I think what we've seen from other ecosystems is that giving a team $10 million to build something big doesn't really work super well. What you really want to do is say, okay, let's do something smaller and do a bunch of those and have folks build things that, seem that they are personally interested in and would want to run. You said the word entrepreneur, which I think is a really important thing in this space, right? Like it's one thing to kind of build a hobby project. It's another thing to say, okay, I want to actually deploy this, and I want users. I want to deal with the pain of them complaining on a weekend. I'm going to wake up on Sunday because my UI is busted or something along those lines. Like that takes a certain kind of mindset. And so we want to find those folks that see opportunities and want to take them on and want to be owners of the thing that they're building. And so that's where bounties, I think, end up being very useful versus large ecosystem grants that tend to kind of attract mercenaries that basically want the payout, and then, they'll move on to the next ecosystem. And, that's not as interesting.
Yeah. I've firsthand experienced those issues with distributing grants, seeing a bare minimum project MVP get delivered, and then poof goes the team. I think I probably know what the answer to this will be, but I want to thank you for your time, for spending an hour with us. Who are the folks that you want reaching out to you, and what's the best way that they can contact you?
Yeah. We want builders. We want orchestration builders that if you're a developer and you have some JavaScript experience and you see a UX multi-chain challenge or an opportunity, and where I want you to think about those opportunities is how you could link together assets or capabilities across multiple chains in a way that doesn't exist. If you see those kinds of opportunities and you want to know where to build it, it's Agoric. And so come find us. We are sort of composability for the multi-chain. That's what Agoric orchestration will give you. Find us in Discord. I'm in there regularly. You can at me. We've got DevRel team that can help. We've got engineers that can help. And our priority is really helping folks build these cross-chain and multi-chain apps that we think are going to be the future of blockchain. And so if you think that's you, we're easy to find. And we should be the best place for you to build that thing.
Awesome, Roland. When I saw Dean talk about chain abstraction, it just kind of blew my mind at Adam Denver. And so I was really excited to have this conversation, and it did not disappoint. So yeah, thanks again for sharing the past hour with us. It was a pleasure. And I hope that folks go choose to learn more about Agoric.
All right. Thanks very much, Dylan.
Well, what did you think of that conversation? I thought it was super fascinating to delve into the concept of chain abstraction and making any cross-chain operation super simple for the end user. It was also really interesting to learn more about Agoric's vision of stablecoins, both USD-backed and over-collateralized, and how they'll fit into the overall ecosystem. And I just really enjoyed learning more about Roland's perspective on the developer landscape and how blockchain developers are no longer hamstrung into building in a particular ecosystem, but can choose which network to build on top of based on the tools and accessibility that the various ecosystems offer. To keep up to date with the Smart Economy podcast, head over to www.smarteconomypodcast.com. And if you've liked the guests that we've had on the show, please don't hesitate to hit that thumbs up button, to give us a review, and to give us a rating. Every review and rating helps us get in front of more people's eyes and ears. And of course, if you're a NEO token holder, please consider voting for NEO News Today as your council representative. We've proudly been serving the NEO ecosystem since 2017, and will continue to do so by putting portions of our council rewards directly back into ecosystem growth initiatives. With all that said, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the Smart Economy podcast, and we look forward to catching you next time.